is that the evangelical maneuver, right, is one in which the study of and in the intramural, right, leads to this realization that what it is that we have is precisely that what we have is what we give, is what we give away. Right? I have it insofar as I give it away. And this raises all kinds of, and I'm not trying to again undermine, or it's not a resolution. It's really to mark the tension between this whole problematic of giving away, of literally, of dispossession, right? Where the ones whose social lives actually constitute a critique of the proper, a critique of ownership, a critique of the possessive notion of selfhood, right? Where the ones whose social lives constitute that critique are put in the position of having to give even what is coded as their nothingness away. That's just not even fair. Okay? And yet, and this is why, again, I talk about it's at the level of cost and benefit and responsibility. It's like the final insult, right? And yet, and I believe that Fanon understood this, So, so that I guess what I'm trying to say is that nationalism, or the field of the intramural, is where we come to be able to think through this and to think about this, and also even to imagine the general dispersion. That's why I think another way to put it, it's the place where it becomes possible to imagine the generalization of the antagonism that Frank talks about, right? Like that the brutality of our lives under the power or under the force of the antagonism turns out to be exactly what it is that we have to give. Okay.
Okay, I'll ask this. It just follows upon what you just said, which was, because you said that you prefaced what you just said, that it's a question of scale, but from what you said thereafter, it's also a question of directionality, momentum, pressure, right? So it's not just about, because scale, it makes it seem like it's a kind of cartography, but this just, you're trying to diagnose a certain kind of motion and exchange.
Yep.
That's not amenable to a certain kind of mapping. And so, and this was a question that was really bothering me, and I think it might just be a matter of my kind of forgetting or misreading. So I understand, your reading and your concern with Jared's concept of the lack of an ontological reach. And at some point, you also used the phrase that there not being ontological resistance. And I just wanted a clarification of what is the relationship between ontological reach and ontological resistance, and what does it mean to lack one and the other?
Ontological resistance, that's a translation of Fanon's term. I just think about, maybe it's too simple, but in general, I would just say that it's the relation between ontological reach and ontological resistance is just that the push-pull of intersubjectivity, and what it means, to be without the one is also to be without the other, so that's the, that's not enough though, huh?
I just want you to riff on how I can see ontological resistance in the world that people make.
Well, I think it's kind of like what I was.
Just beyond Fanon. So.
Well, it kind of came up last time at the end talking about like Mary Prince or Equiano, right? Where I'm nervous about answering this question because it's what over the edge of what I don't think I understand. But here's what I'll say. It could be. I'm sure it must be wrong. But well, I think the way I understand ontological resistance is let's call it a resistance to a certain kind of naming, resistance to a certain kind of interpolation. Okay. You know, therefore, resistance to, and see the reason why I hesitate talking about it, because I don't actually, see I think that what it is that Fanon does when he talks about the absence of ontological resistance with regard to the black is precisely get us to the point where we can begin to understand that this is a general condition, okay? So, in other words, what's at stake is not actually having ontological resistance, but the capacity to claim or to desire ontological resistance. Okay? Because for me, I mean, this goes back to like something like in Butler, like in The Psychic Life of Power, right? Where what we're talking about is that interplay between the thing or the figure or the entity that we come to call the subject and the process of subordination that she talks about under the rubric of subjection, right? So what the notion of ontological resistance, I think, is meant to gesture towards is an attempt at a separation of subject from subjection. And I think what she sufficiently proves in that book is that there's no separation of these things, okay? Which is how come one actually thinks of the absence of ontological resistance as cause for celebration. Because what it indicates and what it points us towards is some other, is whatever other mode of life there is outside of a certain kind of drama of intersubjectivity, which turns out to be problematic precisely because it always manifests itself in relation to this process of subjection and always shows up as what, you know, Butler calls a passionate attachment to power. Okay. So what I love in like Equiano would be those moments where it doesn't show up as ontological resistance, or like the Mary Prince moment. You know, it's the moment of apposition, not opposition, but apposition. You know, who are you to think about freedom? She doesn't try to answer the question, right? She unasks the question. She doesn't say, well, I'm Mary Prince. You know, and I went to Yale, you know, something, you know. She says, you know, that's who I am, you know, I have a degree, you know. So she says, freedom is very sweet, right? That just puts the shit on another, she's like in another, she's like there, but she's someplace else, you know. She's just, and it's this distinction, I guess you could say, between opposition and apposition, which for me also shows up as a distinction between maybe like permeation and surrounding, you know. That's the stuff that I'm really, you know, interested in. And so but what's powerful and important, not only about Fanon's discourse on ontological resistance, but also Jared's formulations about ontological reach, is that they take us precisely to the point, right, where we're able to get, like, they prepare us, they move in preparation for us to begin to think through, right, what it is that ordinarily would only show up as merely the absence of these, right? So it's this kind of thing where you start to say, okay, well, what is it to be poor? What is it to not have these things? What is it to not have the capacity to have? How can we talk about that? You know, and you know, so, I mean, for me at least, you know, I mean, that's what Black Studies is supposed to be. And it's not that Black Studies is the exclusive field within which this particular phenomenon, or whatever you want to call it, is to be studied. It's just that, you know, I guess I'm all for making much ado about nothing.